Good morning, students. In this class, let me explain you about the continued part of population ecology, that is part 2. In the previous class, we have discussed about some of the basic characters of population, and even we have discussed about the growth curves also, and the continued part I am going to explain today. Population growth curve is something that shows the pattern of the growth of a population over time. That is, a growth curve is an empirical model of the evolution of a quantity over time. Growth curves are widely used in biology for quantities such as population size or biomass, individual body height, or biomasses. Values for the measured property can be plotted on a graph as a function of time. In theory, any kind of organism could take over the earth just by reproducing. And in practical, all living organisms need some specific resources such as nutrients and proper environmental conditions to survive and reproduce. The essential resources are not unlimited, and a population can only reach a size that match the availability of resources in its local environment. But in next slide, exponential growth curve. In this type of growth form, the population grows exponentially, and after attaining the peak value, the population may abruptly crash. And this increase in population is continued till large amount of food materials exist in the habitat. After some time, due to increase in population size, the food supply in the habitat becomes limited, which ultimately results in decrease in the population size. So this type of growth curve is known as exponential growth curve. For example, many insect populations show explosive increase in numbers during the rainy season, followed by their disappearance at the end of the season. The following equation exhibits J-shaped growth curve, that is dn by dt is equal to Rn, where dn by dt represents the rate of change in population and R refers to biotic potential and N refers to population size. This is the graph which is of J-shaped type, and here we will get a J-shaped growth curve in such a kind of growth what is called as exponential growth. And in this graph the numbers are being allotted on one axis and the time is allotted on the other axis, and you observe that there is a sudden and exponential increase in the size of the population, and after it reaches the peak there is an abrupt end in the population size increase. So you will get a J-shaped growth curve like this. Coming to sigmoid growth curve. The sigmoid growth curve is also known as logistic growth curve, which is S-shaped. When a few organisms are introduced in an area, the population increase is very slow in the beginning, that is, the positive acceleration phase or lag phase. As it is slow, it is called lag phase. And in the middle phase, the population increase becomes very rapid, which is known as logarithmic phase or log phase. Finally, in the last phase, the population increase is slowed down, that is negative acceleration phase. The level beyond which no major increase can occur is referred to as saturation level or carrying capacity, which is denoted by K. In the last phase, the new organisms are almost equal to the number of dying individuals, and thus there is no more increase in the population size. So it's very clear that sigmoid growth curve or S curve, it is found in the population which exhibits logistic growth. What is carrying capacity? The carrying capacity of a biological species in an environment is the maximum population size of the species that the environment can sustain indefinitely, given the food, habitat, water, and other necessities available in the environment. In population ecology, the carrying capacity is defined as the environment's maximum load. Carrying capacity was originally used to determine the number of animals that could graze on a segment of land without destroying it. Later, the idea has been expanded to more complex populations. So, in this slide, you will be observing a graph or a graphical representation, and again, here the number of individuals are plotted on one axis and the time is plotted on the other axis. And in this kind of growth curve, you will observe a sigmoid type of curve or an S-shaped curve. And as you observe in this graph, initially there is a slow or steady increase in the population size, and suddenly it shoots up, it reaches the peak, and once it attains the saturation level, there is no further increase in the size of that population. And at this level, it is called carrying capacity of that population. So this is a characteristic feature of S-shaped curve or sigmoid curve present in populations which passes through a kind of growth what is known as the steady growth. Carrying capacity. The actual size of the population is usually higher or lower than the carrying capacity. Below capacity, it is the birth rate increases, and above capacity is seen in population or the population will die or starve. Population growth curves, the comparison, the J curve and S curve. So in this slide you will be observing the two different types of curve, that is J and S curve. So J curve is present in exponential growth and S curve is obtained in logistic growth. So this is what the status of the two different populations which follows the two types of growth, that is exponential growth and logistic growth. Carrying capacity of the species. Again here in this graphical representation, the number of individuals are plotted on one axis and time is plotted on the other axis. And here as you see in the beginning, the carrying capacity of the species, it experiences R selection, and the carrying capacity of this population, once it reaches the peak level, it experiences K selection, that is carrying capacity. Biotic potential. The maximum reproductive capacity of an organism under optimum environmental conditions is known as biotic potential. It is often expressed as a proportional or percentage increase per year, as in the statement, the human population increased by 3% last year. It can also be expressed as the time it takes for a population to double in its size, that is, doubling time. In disease-related studies, it is comparable to the force of infection, the number of susceptible individuals each infected individual further infects. The full expression of the biotic potential of an organism is restricted by environmental resistance, any factor that limits the increase in number of the population. These factors include unfavorable climatic conditions, lack of spaces or space, light, or a suitable substrate, deficiency of necessary chemical compounds or minerals, and the inhibiting effects of predators, parasites, disease organisms, or unfavorable genetic changes. So, these are certain factors which are accounting for this biotic potential of an organism in a given environment. Biotic potential is equal to the maximum possible growth rate under ideal conditions. What is ideal conditions? Ideal conditions varies between species, but it implies that the population has plenty of food, space, and mates, that there are few predators or parasites, that there is a good climate, etc. The biotic potential of a population is seldom reached or rarely reached, since conditions are usually not ideal. That means to say, the environmental conditions, as they are always subjected to variations or fluctuations, a population generally do not reach biotic potential. Understanding the biotic potential is important when people want to influence the size of a population, such as increasing an endangered species or decreasing a pest species. Limits on population growth. Biotic potential versus environmental resistance. No population can increase in its size indefinitely. The intrinsic rate of increase, that is R, is the rate at which a population would grow if it had unlimited resources. Carrying capacity K, the maximum population of a given species that a particular habitat can sustain indefinitely without degrading the habitat. Now, some comparison between biotic potential and environmental resistance. The reproductive rate, ability to migrate, that is animals or disperse seeds, ability to invade new habitats, defensive mechanisms, ability to cope with adverse conditions. So these are certain important characteristics of biotic potential. Coming to environmental resistance, lack of food or nutrients, lack of water, lack of suitable habitat, adverse weather, predators, diseases, parasites, and competitors. See, this environmental resistance, always it influences on the biotic potential. So ultimately we can conclude like this: the biotic potential ability of a population is entirely dependent on the environmental resistance, that is through the factors which I have mentioned in this slide. Coming to some principles related to population size, the first one being Ali's law. Ali's law says that there is a positive relationship between individual fitness and either the numbers or density of conspecifics. Conspecifics are other individuals of the same species. In other words, as the number of individuals in a population increases, or as population density increases, the survival and reproduction also increase. So this was worked out in detail and explained by a scientist by name Berryman in 1999. A good example occurs when animals aggregate in groups for protection and thereby dilute the threat that each individual faces from a predator. For example, an individual sparrow in a flock of 4 sparrows that is attacked by a successful predator has 75% chance of survival, while an individual sparrow in a flock of 100 has a 99% of chance of survival. So if the number of individuals are lesser, the chances of survival is also lesser, and on the other hand, If the number of the individuals in a population is more, it will have more chance of survival. According to Ali's law, there is reduced reproduction or reduced survival at low population densities or low population sizes. For example, when the population size of an insect pollinated plant becomes low, or if a low number of individuals flower during a year, fewer seeds will be produced per plant because insect pollinators will have a harder time finding few flowers than many flowers. So this was worked out and explained by another scientist by name Forsyth in 2003. Because small populations have lowered reproduction or survival capacity, Ali's law is of special interest to ecologists that work with endangered species. In case of endangered species, the number of individuals present in such endangered populations is very low, and this will be a challenging in case of such endangered species. Coming to another principle, competitive exclusion principle, which was explained by a scientist, a very famous scientist by name Gauss. The principle of competitive exclusion was proposed by G.F. Gauss, which states that two species competing for the same resources cannot coexist, and this law is also known as Gauss' law. So, according to this Gauss principle or law, two populations or two species which are present in the same habitat will compete for the same kind of resources, and they cannot coexist for a long time. So this is what the main meaning of this competitive exclusion principle. And one population will drive off the other one if any of the members of the depleted population remains. That would be because they have adapted themselves according to the different niche. For example, if a forest has maximum carnivorous animals, that area will always have food scarcity. It's quite natural. Due to the scarcity of food, there will be competition among the animals due to survival issues. The strong ones will win over the weaker group and will solely flourish. Another example of competitive exclusion is that the red squirrels replacing the grey squirrels in Britain, the number of red squirrels decreased because of the disappearance of hazelnuts, competitive exclusion, and diseases. Grey squirrels easily adapted to the environment and replaced the red squirrels gradually. There are two kinds of competitions according to this competitive exclusion principle. One is interspecific competition, another is intraspecific competition. Interspecific competition is that competition which takes place between the organisms of different species, while intraspecific competition, the name itself suggests intra means within and inter means between. So, intraspecific competition is the competition that takes place between the organisms of the same species. So, these are the two types of competitions according to this concept of competitive exclusion principle. In the experiment shown in the graph, two species of paramecia, that is Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum, were first grown in separate cultures, that is shown in dashed lines, and in separate cultures but under the same conditions, both populations grew. However, when both species were grown together in the same culture, that is in solid line, the species one species outcompeted the other one, and hence this is known as competitive exclusion principle. So as you see in this first graph, this is what the graph showing the growth curve of that Paramecium aurelia, and this is of Paramecium caudatum. And here when the same conditions are provided in the culture medium, both will exhibit almost the same type of growth curve. That is what you can make out in these two graphs. However, when both of them are grown in the same culture medium, as you see here, Paramecium aurelia, it excludes or it competes with the Paramecium caudatum, which is shown in purple line here, that is going to be excluded because of the intense competition offered by Paramecium aurelia. So this is a clear pictorial or graphical representation to explain the concept of competitive exclusion principle. So this is all about today's class. Dear students, let us continue the rest of the things in next class. Thank you.